What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Step It Up Entrepreneur Podcast. Your host, Thomas Keenan. And today we have a fantastic guest, Mr. Dan Bowman. My homie Dan flew in from Nashville, Tennessee to sit down with us today and record this podcast. Him and I have been talking about it for several months. And just a guy who's got a ton of experience, has done some really cool things, works with very high-end people on a daily basis as at his position at Titan Motoring. And for those of you who don't know, Titan Motoring is a really badass company. I know Phil, the owner over there, as well as Dan, spent a lot of time with these guys, had really good high-level conversations with them. And they're one of the top guys in the industry when it comes to 12-volt and aftermarket automotive in general. And, just spent a lot of time with Dan over the past couple of years and had great conversations with him and said, hey, man, why don't you come in here so we can do this in person? And this has just been a really fantastic episode. I think you're going to learn a lot about some of the methodologies that Dan is using, especially in his high-level sales position. But definitely take a look into this, listen to what he's saying, listen to how he surrounds himself with very particular special people, the questions he asks, how he interacts with them, and how this man is closing extremely high-ticket sales in the 12-volt automotive space, right? So if someone like Dan is able to do this in the car space, there's no reason why other people can't do this in a business-to-business space or whatever it is, whatever product, service, or widget you are selling to your clients. So with that being said, enjoy the episode. It's pretty cool that you get the ability to interact with some high-level people on a day-to-day basis.
It's mind-boggling, actually.
Yeah.
It's really great, and because you never know who's going to walk through the door, and as you're trying to figure out, what is it they're after.
Yeah.
A lot of times, what they do is sort of corresponds with who they are in life, right? So before I moved down to Tennessee, I was up in central New Jersey. That was the Silicon Valley of finance. Finance and pharma, right? Once you have talked to a couple hundred of those people, you know exactly how they want this to all go down, right? Yeah. They're not interested in wasting their time. They really don't. They don't want to have an opinion. They want you to know what they want and get it done and sort of make it easy. I get down to Nashville, and I'm looking around, and one day I'm asking them, like, where does all the money come from, right? And you get like the basic answer. It's all music.
Yeah.
Like, no. Like, I know people in the music industry, not this kind of money. And then you come to find out, like, you have people that are generational landowners that have, hundreds of acres that are all developed with commercial and retail, and they're holding the leases, right? You have people that, Tennessee is extremely business friendly. And now you have like all the mass exodus out of our old stomping grounds from the Northeast moving down. So they're already flush. They don't have to go to the office. You have people coming in from California and all that. So yeah, it is really very interesting because you never know who you're going to have, standing in front of you, how important they might be in their world,
Right.
And like you're this far from them and now you're the most important person. So yeah, it's really very interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure early on in life, you probably had, and I know I have too, but you have examples or situations where you never know who you're talking to. So watch what comes out of your mouth.
100%.
Because you don't know who has influence in that room versus who does not, who can make things happen versus who cannot, who can actually help you in the future if you treat them correctly today.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got these situations or stories where you've inserted foot into mouth?
Oh, immediately I have a few, right? So, and oddly, we were just talking about football.
Yeah.
So I had a client come in, a younger guy, and he was talking about how he wanted to do something in a Harley F-150. So that tells you how old this was, right? And I explained it to him and, figured I was doing my normal thorough job. Well, it comes back that he was way unimpressed with the way I was treating him and tried to get me fired.
Wow.
Right? He was a football player, right? And he was the biggest thing to come out of that area. Really big contract, his first contract, second contract was big.
Right.
And just I wasn't catering to him. And I had no idea. The funny thing is fast forward a couple years later, and he comes in, we're buddies, we hug it up, I've driven him home. So much so I was driving him home one day, and I asked him, I was like, hey, what does that look like where you get your first contract, and then everyone thinks you're rich? He's like, well, exactly, everyone thinks you're rich. He's like, you have your manager, you have taxes, you have this, and you have that. And he's like, and you don't know if you're going to make it past your first season. So if you've got any sort of management behind you, they're going to tell you, squirrel your money away.
Yeah.
was like, so what's the first thing you bought? And he reaches in his shirt and pulls out this chain.
Yeah.
And it was like a box length diamond chain.
Right.
I was like, how much was that? He's like, 100. I was like, let me try it on. He's like, absolutely not. So, but then it came to the point where he was referring me to people. He's like, Dan is the only person I'll go to. He actually said one time, and he's like, I trust him with my life. I was like, that's a bit much. He trusts me with his cars, you know?
Yeah.
But so much so that years later, he started doing real estate development and business things. He opened up a huge fitness center and calls me up. He's like, hey, I need you to do all my audio, video, and cameras. Like, I was in the middle of a 10-year non-compete.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I can't do it. You know? He's like, well, you're who I want. You know, I don't know who else to trust. So I referred somebody to him, and they got along great, and the job was a success. But yeah, it's like one of those things. Like, had I known that he was a superstar, like, it's not necessarily in my nature to kind of like be all like falling all over somebody.
Yeah.
But you know, I may have just turned up the charm just a little bit more, you know. But like, so it was you again, because you just don't know. I'll tell you another time. You know, when you've had a situation where you've had somebody in the store and they don't speak directly to you, right? They speak to their house manager, who then speaks to you, and you're like,
what the fuck's going on here?
Who do I answer to? Like, who do I respond to? You know?
Yeah.
So I just got to the point where this thing where I was just joking before about saying, hey, now that they're on the other side of the counter for me, I'm the most important.
Yes.
So I just kind of, that's where I adopted that. So I had one of the wealthiest families, right? A guy that was in that family that was paid to stay away, right? His house manager comes in and they're asking me questions. And so house manager's asking me questions, but I'm looking dead into his eyes and responding, you know, so much so that he was just like kind of like backing away, and he'd step over and be like, you know, so yeah, I've had all types.
It's awkward.
Yeah. But, you know, apparently it happens.
Sure.
Right. And a buddy of mine worked for a famous architect that said the same thing. He's like, dude, I literally work in this guy's house.
Yeah.
I worked for him for 4 years. He never said a word to me once.
Yeah.
You know,
that's really odd. You know, go back many years ago, right? And we haven't gotten into this part of the podcast yet, and we will. We'll explain to people who you are, what you do, who you work for, and that so on and so forth. But just for the listeners right now, know that Dan Bowman, who's sitting across from me, we come from the same world, right? I spent 20-something years in the car audio industry. You're still heavily involved there. So go back in time. This is, I don't know, man. I was 26, 27, 28 years old. It was a 3-year period between my first company, Exquisite Mobile Electronics, closing down, and me then opening Top Class in 2009. So it's somewhere between there, I went to work for this gentleman, Jimmy Stavrinos. He was the owner of Speedworld FX in Riverhead, New York.
he had the Lamborghinis. Like, did he own multiple businesses?
He does. His brother also is heavily involved and has locations in the Southeast. His brother Dino. So Jimmy's not as flashy as Dino.
Okay.
So
wrong Jimmy.
So I'm working for Jimmy, and we're in the east end of Long Island. You know, and for those people who don't know where Riverhead is the end of the island before the North and South Fork split.
Right.
And it's a big, not a big city, but it's the city there. So we get a lot of people from all walks of life, anywhere from blue collar Joe Blow at the mechanic up the block, all the way to the really wealthy vineyard owners, to the really uber wealthy on the South Fork who have all the real money. Yeah,
generational money.
Yeah, like, you know, financial people from New York City and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Right, like anything you can think of on Billions in the Hamptons, those people would walk in and do business with us. So this old timer comes in, and he'd come in a couple different times. He was a cocky asshole, right? Like flat out. Like this guy walked in and it was like, oh, this fucking guy again. It's one of those, right? But hey, this is retail. You don't have control over who walks in your door.
No, absolutely.
And when someone walks in, you serve them. You treat them with as much respect as you can. So this guy comes in, and we sold everything automotive, very similar to what you guys do. Not at the level you guys are at, but if people wanted to come in and they wanted performance parts, lift kits, wheels, tires, battery tenders, battery buddies, like we were doing all that crap. So we always had these battery buddies on the fucking wall.
Yeah.
And this guy loved them because he had this massive collection of old cars.
Right.
So he'd come into us, bring a car, and be like, hey, put one of those on. That way it doesn't kill my battery when I leave my car parked in my 400-car garage in my estate in Southampton.
Yeah.
So he brings a car in. I knock one out one day. Brings another one in a couple days later and knocked that one out. And every time this fucking guy came in, just to prove that he was wealthy, he would take out his black Amex.
Yeah.
Right now, there's different black Amexes. I don't know if you're aware of this. Okay, and you probably are. The ones that you give to the staff to help you, they're just black.
Yeah.
But the one that's given to the actual card holder,
the one that barely slides through the credit card machine.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's an 1/8 inch or so thick, and it tapers down to
it's titanium.
Yes. Well, he would come in with that card, and he would hold it up about 3 feet and literally let go and drop it on the fucking counter.
Bling, bling, bling.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was his statement of, I'm better than you.
Yeah.
It drove me crazy, but at the same point in time, it kind of inspired me.
Yeah.
Right? A little yin-yang action going on there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I had a client, 19 years old, that carried one. Oof. Yeah. He goes to work in a helicopter.
I believe it.
So, but you know what? I just texted him the other day because, as you know, we're going to have an event in Atlantic City this year. And one of the distributors involved is looking for a venue to have their sort of after party deal. I was like, I don't know if this will work, but I know somebody. I'll see who, like, obviously he's not involved, but who do you call to see if you can book the club at the top of that casino? You know, and he was like, oh man, it's so great to hear from you. You know, he's like, oh, we've been up to this and that. And he's like the nicest kid. But I mean, literally, as long as I've known him, he's carried a black Amex. Yeah. You know, if a new Raptor's out, he has one that day. Yeah. He's got, you know, if he can't fly to work, he drives an Urus, like that sort of thing.
It's pretty cool, bro.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. Yeah. Again, one of those people, like he could come into somebody's location and have no idea that by treating him like perhaps he can't come in and make these decisions on his own, you might not get a lifetime of business, you know? Yeah. So, yeah.
Pretty sweet.
Yeah. I'll tell you another quick one if we have time.
Yeah, let's go.
The guy that I've always used for my paintless dent repair calls me up one day. He's like, hey, can you get out of your shop? This is when I had my own shop. He goes, can you get out of your shop for an hour or two? And I'm like, it's really difficult. You know, we're like a 2.5-man show. He's like, well, this is a referral that when this guy calls, you go. I was like, okay. So I get a phone call, and it's just like, hey, here's the address. When you get there, call me. We'll let you in. And from the address, I knew it was like on the backside of New Hope, Pennsylvania in Solebury. Super nice area, you know. So I drive out there, really pretty drive. I get to this gate, and I call him up, and he buzzes me in. He's like, come up and then stop at the barn, right? I still don't know why I'm going there. And he meets me there, and he's like, hey, Rocky, who's our mutual friend, he goes, you're the guy, he says, to work on my stuff. And immediately I'm like, I agree with him, yes. But what am I working on, you know? And he's like, I have a truck and a trailer that I might do some stuff. He's like, you know, I like cars, so I'm constantly getting in and out of them, you know, all that sort of thing. I was like, well, whatever it is, I'm into it. He's like, well, let me show you around. So he shows me this horse barn, right, that has a hot tub for the horses.
For the horses? For
the horses.
Holy shit.
A treadmill that's like computer generated so it can do like all this. And he's in the wash bay, infrared lighting to dry the horses off, right? And he goes on to tell me that the riding ring with the jumping ring, it's to full Olympic spec. Wow. Right? And I'm like, wow, like this is insane, right? Gold chandeliers, everything's like hand stained and everything like that. And keep in mind, I just met this guy, right? Yeah. His name's Bob. And I'm talking to him, and we go look at the projects and all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, hey, Bob, where are the horses? And he just looks down at his watch and kind of cocks his head to the side. And he's like, they're in the air, right? And what started to fall out of my mouth was, how much does that cost, right? And had I known him better, I might have actually asked. Yeah. But I gathered it up, and I asked him, like, what does a plane like that look like? Because something was falling out of my mouth. Yeah, I wasn't ready for it. Yeah. And he goes, oh, it's a converted cargo plane. I was like, oh, okay. So he's got this horse trailer. He wants GPS tracking, right? And I'm starting to pick up. These horses are kind of high value. Yeah. I'm like, so correct me if I'm wrong. You have this trailer, you have this truck, and you have a backup truck. He's like, yes, to all of it. But that truck is yours. Who drives this one? And he says, it's someone on staff. I'm like, well, if you're concerned about the horses and knowing where they're at, why don't we not only put tracking on the trailer, but put it on the truck as well, right? And then I can put a solar panel on the trailer, put a bigger battery. I can hide it all, and then we can do cameras. And he's like, can you do strobe lights? I'm like, yeah, I can do strobe lights. And he's like, okay, what else do I need? I'm like, well, if you need strobe lights, do you want a train horn? Right? And he's like, yeah, I want a train horn.
Yeah.
And do it. He's like, whatever you do on this truck, do on that truck so that they just plug in. So I go start working after hours out on these trucks. And I'm there like a couple weeks later, and he's like, oh, you just missed the horses. I'm like, Bob, the trailer's right there. Yeah. Your brand new trailer's right there. He's like, no. They got picked up by a semi. And at this point, I'm like, all right, I have to ask you.
Yeah.
What am I doing with this? He's like, this trailer is literally in case there's a medical emergency.
Oh, shit.
So he's like, if the horses are going to be anywhere more than 2 hours, they're in the truck. If they're any more than X amount of hours, they're on the plane. Still hasn't said like what these horses do.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So then we get talking, and this is right when the Autobiography Range Rover came out. He's like, have you seen the Autobiography Range Rover yet? I was like, I have a client that's got one on order. He's like, well, my long wheelbase came in, and when I went to go pick it up, there's a short wheelbase, so I got that one too. You want to go look at them? So then we're looking at them. They're parked in the barn. And I'm like, what do you have up at the house? So he takes me up to the garage, and the garage attached to the house, he didn't even show me, but he rattled off a couple cars. We go into this 4-stall garage, and it's 4 Ferraris down, 4 Porsches up, And by that time, I had worked on a car that his wife has driven in. And we just to give you an idea of the conversations that you'll have, we're talking one day. I'm standing in his office in the horse barn, and he's like clicking on the thing. He's like, I totally forgot I ordered a Ferrari F12, and it's coming in like 2 weeks. I'm like, that's pretty cool. He's like, yeah. He's like, I've been looking at this yellow Enzo, and I think I want it. And this is like the first time I ever used like this thing, this catch-all line. I was like, well, if it doesn't change how many times you can go to Starbucks this week, I'd get it. Just like that, right? And he's like, okay. And I'm like, what are they asking for it? He's like, 1.6 million.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh. Well, at the time, he was on the chase to try and get a lot Ferrari. And you already had some of the other prerequisites, So I was like, I don't know, Bob. Like, you seem to be doing okay. I mean, I don't know what you do for a living. You got a lot of cool cars.
Yeah.
Like I was sort of joking, but like, does 1.6 like move the needle? He's like, not really. He's like, but I feel some kind of way, So you just never know, right? Because this dude was wearing shorts from Target, right? A shirt I didn't recognize, never had a flashy watch on, Maybe a couple times I spotted expensive shoes, but you just never, ever know, But that was like one of those guys I would have never met had I not been referred,
Yep.
And those, like, hey, if this guy calls, go see him.
Oh, I got one.
Yeah.
I'll give you my version of it too. This is cool, just like sharing old war stories here.
Yeah.
I had left Speed World, was in probably the first year or so, maybe 2 years of Top Class. And we hadn't really found our groove there yet. We weren't exclusively GPS tracking at that point.
Right.
I just started to get a little bit into the self-development space. And my Snap-on dealer calls me, Rob. I had a great relationship with him. I mean, I spent a fuck ton of money with him and always paid my bill. So I had a great relationship.
Exactly.
So he calls me up, and he used to come into the store and like just probably similar to you guys, right? Like you always have a cool project going on.
Yeah.
So they, when Snap-on or the Mack truck would come, they would just stop and be like, "Oh, let's go spend some time with these guys.
Yeah.
Talk shop, shoot the shit, and see what kind of cool shit they're working on." So get to know this guy well, and like to the point where I started doing work for Rob on his personal vehicles. And we were one of 2 or 3 stereo shops in the area, and like we were the only place that did halfway decent work.
Right.
So it was a real easy decision. So he has a client of his who he sells a ton of tools to. Call him up, and Rob calls me, and he goes, "Hey," he goes, "I got something for you, but I got to give you a little prerequisite." He goes, "This guy's a little off. He's very particular.
Yeah.
If he doesn't like you, he's probably going to throw you out. But if he likes you, he's going to love you.
Yeah. And we should qualify that by saying we're our region of where we were from legitimately throw you out.
Yes.
And never, ever, like, wouldn't spit on you if you were on fire if they don't like you.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
So he gives me this guy's number. And with that, he goes, don't call him Mike. Call him Michael. Okay, fuck, here we go. So I
Try and drill that one in.
Yeah. Call this guy up, get on the phone with him, and he's like, I got a Sprinter, Mercedes Sprinter. Long one, tall one. I want cameras on it. Because people think I'm fucking crazy, but I want cameras on it. Okay, cool. Hey, Michael, the best thing here for me is to come see it with my own eyes, and we'll have a conversation. And if it's something I can help you with, cool. We'll go from there. So where do you live, man? And he lives in the North Fork in Mattituck, okay? And for those who are familiar with the area, maybe you're not, Mattituck is in the heart of wine country on the North Fork of Long Island. This guy's backyard at the time basically butted up to Macari Vineyard, which is a really big name vineyard out there. So I drive out there and pulling down this long-ass dirt driveway.
Yep.
And I pull into this property. It's probably 4 acres or so, maybe 5 acres. And as I pull up, the first building I see, I think is a house.
Right.
It turns out it's his barn, garage. To the left of it is his house, giant house, indoor swimming pool, the whole 9 yards.
Right.
With its own garages over there too. So have conversations with him. This Sprinter's parked out front. Start doing the walk around conversations. Hey man, what are you trying to do here? I want cameras outside. I want cameras inside. And like things just aren't adding up for me.
Right.
Because I open up the back doors of this Sprinter. It's loaded with tools. Like, and he looks. It's funny because I still have a relationship with this guy today. Right. And he often jokes with it too. He goes, I know I look like I crawled out of a cardboard box last night, but I'm really fucking wealthy. Yeah.
It's always nice when they give you that disclaimer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And same deal. Like, this is a guy, never anything flashy. Like Target style clothes. Or he went to Kroger or Kmart and picked up something that just fits. Like, not a care in the world what he looks like from that perspective. But really cool guy. We start talking, and I see tools and like tools in this truck. I'm like, man, this guy's got some specialty tools. Yeah. And we show up to do the work on this vehicle, and by the way, it turned into way more than just a couple cameras. It was cameras, audio system, you name it, we did at this thing. Did a bunch of interior lighting for him so he could actually work in the back of the van. Yeah. So we get there to do the work, and showed up with like 3 of my guys. And in the front seat of his truck, he's got this. It's like one of those metal suitcases that you'd see in the movies that someone would put the handcuff around their wrist and not let anyone take.
The attaché.
Yes. So I grabbed this thing and I'm taking it out of the front seat, and he looks at me and he goes, "Be careful with that." Okay. At this point, like, I've had some conversations with him, and I have the confidence to say, "Michael, what's up with this?" And he then takes it. We go to the back of the van. He opens it up, and inside is a computer. He said, "This computer cost me $36,000." And he goes, like, "This is what I use for my trade." Right. And Michael, still to this day, is a very high-end, well-known yacht mechanic. Right. Specializing in diesel. Right. This is the guy who shows up and does work for the really high-end, wealthy people who own mega yachts. Yeah. And when they call him, they have a problem. And 9 times out of 10, he either takes his van and drives directly to them. Right. Or they send the jet and pick him up. Yeah. So, like, all right, but this is kind of strange. Like, my brain can't comprehend, like, hey, this is a blue-collar guy who works with his hands like I do. And he's got all of these things. Yeah. A barn full of cars. This is 2 stories, by the way. The second floor is wood shop only. Yeah. The first floor is automotive / metal shop. Yeah. And it's very well used too. Like the guy knows what he's doing. I just couldn't comprehend it. So over time, start having conversations with this guy and start learning a lot from him as well. Right. This is definitely someone who I looked at from more of a mentorship perspective for quite some time. Right. He was the one who was like, go read. And when you're done reading, go read some more.
Yeah.
And when you're done reading, then go read some more. And when you get around high-end people, shut your mouth and listen.
Yeah.
Because you'll pick up on more than you think you will.
Mm-hmm.
And give me all these little tips and cues. And Michael's also one of the people who inspired me to have the balls to pick up and move cross country.
Right.
So now Michael sold this house towards, I don't know, one of the last 2 or 3 vehicles I worked on for him. He decided to sell it. Made a bunch of money on it. He bought the house for pennies on the dollar during the last real estate crash, 08, 09.
Right.
Sold the house for millions, right? I find out that this guy's got more commercial property than he knows what to do with. He owned a marina on the east end of Long Island. I'm not going to say which one so people don't know who he is.
Yeah.
Owned it, sold it, and in that marina had all of the accoutrements that a marina has.
Yeah.
Right? The land, the restaurant, the repair shop, and everything else that went along with it.
Yeah.
So this guy is very well off and just started having real conversations with me. And he tells me that he's moving to South Carolina. All right, cool. Now, the curiosity in me is like, okay, why?
Yeah.
Lays it all out, bullet points, and then says, when you're ready to do it, this is the process that I went through.
Yeah.
This is why I'm moving to South Carolina. So the biggest piece for him, and you'll understand this, is like, all right, if I'm going to move anywhere in the country, and I'm coming out of New York, which is,
Yeah.
tax city, tax haven.
Yeah.
Let's go to some place in the country that has no state income tax.
Yeah.
All
My
right,
money's instantly worth more.
boom, bingo.
Yeah.
So now you're limited. I think it's either 7 or 9 states. I think it's 7 states. In the
I'm in
country.
one of them.
Yep. So am I.
Yeah.
No, that's very intentional, sir.
Yeah.
So with him, he's like, here are the 7 or so states, and only I think 3 of them are on the coast.
Yeah.
Delaware, Florida, and South Carolina.
Yep.
So for him, it was a no-brainer because he's like, I don't want to live in Florida because
Yep.
I'm not living in Delaware because it's not that much better.
Because of Delaware.
Right. And he goes, South Carolina it is.
Yeah.
And then, okay, cool. Once I decided the region, this is how I'm going to determine where I'm going to live. So just really well thought out. And the guy definitely gave me a ton of information, inspired the crap out of me. And I will tell you this gentleman always paid in cash.
Yeah.
The first time I met him, we basically say, all right, this is the job, this is what it is. What do you think it's going to be? And I threw a number out there, like it's going to be somewhat around here before I put the formal quote together. He goes, all right, cool. Come with me inside. I'll give you a deposit.
Right.
So we go into one room in this barn/garage of his. It's filled with gun safes.
Yep.
So we walk over to one of the safes. He cracks it open, cracks the safe open, and the top left corner is filled with cash.
Yeah.
And the rest of it is guns. And not just like any everyday guns.
Yeah, the good
all
stuff.
Custom handguns, custom rifles.
Yeah.
And the dude pulls out a wad of cash and hands it to me. And the North Fork of Long Island, where he was, there is a ferry, maybe 20 minutes or so away, that will shoot you right over to New London, Connecticut. And when you get to New London, Connecticut, it's only a 15 or 20-minute drive to the casinos.
Right.
So this wad of hundreds that he gives me is wrapped in casino money.
Right.
So now I'm just curious as all shit. I'm like, like, Michael, what the hell is this? I'm like,
Yeah.
he's like, he goes, I count cards. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, like Rain Man.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
So this guy, not only is he, he's a cool guy when you get to know him and he likes you. Very willing to share his information.
Yep.
But also probably at a Mensa level of genius.
Yeah.
Just a cool experience. Definitely enjoyed my time working with him and having conversations with him because I learned so much in a short period of time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing what people that are, rightly or wrongly, if you consider them like way up the food chain from you.
Yeah.
Because ultimately more so, I think they want to see people level up. And when they see somebody that's hardworking, dedicated, and particularly good at what they do, you'd be very surprised on some of the advice that can come your way, and it always seems like it's out of left field.
Yeah.
Right. Or it just seems unattainable. Right. So, and I can remember the first time I ever heard that if you don't think you can afford it, perhaps you can't. You can't not afford. You can't afford not to do it. And that was when I had my own business. And I had a repeat client that was super successful.
Yeah.
And he wasn't born with money falling out of every hole in his body, right? He made some smart real estate business deals, and then he bought into some franchises that were doing really, really well. They were well placed. And he's like, you need to hire an employee. I'm like, I can barely eat as it is. He's like, you can't eat because you're only making money off your own back, right? He's like, you need another body as that multiplier, you know? And I would just, it was during the collapse, right? I lost my job, and instead of going to work somewhere else, we opened a business, right? It's like, okay, the economy's tanking. Nobody needs what we do. Let's open a business, right? So, you know, and we were a couple years in. He's like, no. He's like, I swear to you, it'll pay off. And the entire time I was involved, we never had a full-time employee, so we never were able to scale. So we were very much hand-to-mouth. We were safe. You know, we were safe. All our bills were paid and all that sort of stuff. But like we weren't balling outrageous, you know. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. All right. We went all over the place.
Yeah, there we are.
Let's go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
Dan Bowman.
That's me.
Courtesy, what is your title right now at Titan Motoring in Nashville, Tennessee?
It's in flux.
Is it?
It's in flux. Yeah. So I've always, I've had client specialist on my card.
Yeah.
Right. They want me to take an active role overseeing the sales department with a title, right? And I'm like, well, if there's a title, there has to be other things that come with the title. I don't need the title, you know. So we're in flux. So effectively, I'm running the front of house sales counter, and I also do things for like the wholesale side.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah.
All right, love it. For those who are listening, you and I have been connected for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
We are both heavily involved in the MEA, Mobile Electronics Association. We both speak at K-Fest, Knowledge Fest, all their events across the country 4 times a year. And we've had some really cool interactions over the last probably 2 years at this point.
Yeah.
Spend some time together, do some dinner, and, you know, get to basically break bread and do life with each other, which I think is awesome.
Yeah.
Let's go back, though. You know, you talk about being from the Northeast. You talk about owning your own business. Obviously, you're in the car industry. You deal with some really high-end clientele this day, which I think is rad because not everyone in the car space does.
Right.
Right. Where did all of this come from? What was the beginning? What got you into car stereo? What got you to learn and become or turn into or become the sales mogul, the sales genius that you are today?
So I'll try and condense it as much as I can.
Yeah.
All right. So I grew up in a super affluent area with 2 parents that worked in factories, essentially. My dad worked for Delco and, you know, the battery company for 47 years. Like he got home from the Korean War and went to go work at Delco, only worked there his entire life. My mother was an occupational health services nurse at a pharmaceutical company. So she was effectively the school nurse for a factory.
Got it.
And I grew up in like a big new money town, right? All like my friends' parents had huge houses. They went away. They went skiing for like spring break or like for fall break, all that sort of stuff. And I got to see what you know, what you could achieve, like what's out there. Sort of almost like the taste for nicer things. Yep. So from the moment that I could start working, I wanted to work because here I was trying to keep up with these people that I grew up with that you know, they were having everything handed to them. So in any case, on top of all that, I've been reading car audio magazines and boat magazines and all that since I was a little kid, and I really wanted to get into it. So, but I wanted to start at a specialty store. I didn't want to start at a chain store. So there was a place in Kendall Park, New Jersey, that I was a customer there, and every so often I'd put an application in, right, and I would check up like you're supposed to, and be like, oh, we're not hiring. Yeah. So one night I'm watching late night cable TV, and they had a commercial, and at the end of the commercial it said now hiring. So I waited till the next morning, 9 o'clock when they opened. I called up and I said, I'd like to speak to Joe. He was the owner. Yeah. And they put me through. He's like, hey, this is Joe. Can I help you? I was like, I thought you weren't hiring. He's like, excuse me? I was like, I thought you weren't hiring. Yeah. He's like, you're going to have to give me more information than that, right? So I was like, look, I've put my application in like no less than 3 times, and I follow up every single time. And then I'm told you're not hiring. I watched the commercial. It said you're hiring. Which one is it? Yeah. He goes, can you come see me today? Yeah. I was like, yeah, I can. Yeah. And I went up there and he hired me on the spot. Yeah. Well, as it turns out, I didn't know nearly what I didn't know. But I started out as a road installer, going out and doing dealership work, installing CD changers. Some of you will have to Google that, right? Installing CD changers and then keyless entries.
FM modulated CD
Yeah,
changers.
yeah, absolutely.
They were big, man.
And then like the plugins. And it was so smart, right? Because you think about it. Here I was, a kid fresh out of high school, right? CD changers on the wholesale side were probably about $400 to the dealer at the time.
Yeah.
I got up within a few weeks. I was at the point where I was probably doing like upwards of 10 a day. Where can you take someone off the street and make that kind of revenue off them quickly? But I was like, hey, I want to do more. I want to do more. That shop was doing a project for Bad Boy Entertainment, right? They were doing a van because there were a bunch of albums that were being released and they needed help. I'm like, I'll come in and I'll help, right? I just wanted to do whatever I could. And one night Joe comes to me and he's like, hey, can you stay late tonight and work the sales counter? We don't ever like to have only one person on the sales counter. And my father, being a factory worker, is like, if you're offered more time or another shift, you always say yes, because you might not ever be asked again. So I said, yeah, absolutely. So in the background, I was that guy that would read every single thing, right? I knew how to work all the radios and all that. Well, after the second night of helping out on the counter, he's like, you can leave your toolbox at home. You're on sales now, right? So from there, I started, you know, I didn't have that filter to say, no, don't offer this. Like I'd look through the manual and be like, oh, wow, like I can wire up 10 subs off of 1 amp. The very next person who walked through the door, I've sold them 10 subs wired up off of 1 amp, right?
Yeah.
So then fast forward, I left there to chase my dreams, and I ended up at what was probably one of the highest end shops in central New Jersey, running front of house.
Yeah.
So here, it's like the budgets are much bigger, right? You're touching nicer cars. I have guys that have been doing this longer than I've been alive behind me, and that was like that was the catalyst. That was the catapult to be like, you know. I remember I did an audio, like a big audio package. It was $27,000, like my first year, like in there, like $27,000 in just audio.
It's a big audio system,
right? And it wasn't for a kid. Yeah. It wasn't for like what you think, right? It was for a guy that worked in finance. And then I get another one, and then that's where what I was saying before. You start to see, like, oh, okay, like these guys want their stuff nice, right? You can just like don't shoot for the moon, but don't underserve. Yeah, and that's where it all came in. That, and then because my relationships with the clients, our relationships with the dealers started to grow. So the year that the 996 Turbo Porsche came out, I sat in every single one of them that they sold because I did something to every single one. We would do video systems in Lexus, right? I would grab the keys, drive them back without a ride, and go drop the car off to the finance manager, who was the youngest finance manager in the country for Lexus, and he got it, right? He knew how to make money off of what we were doing, and it was very transactional. Like, hey, this is the price that I can give it to you. This is the price that I sell it in the store, so you have that margin. Plus, because you are the dealer, you can probably get a little bit more comfortably. Yeah. So, like, I would literally go drop off a car and be like, you got something for me to drive back so I can do something else? And you'd be like, go pick like an SUV. Just pick a black or a silver one. Don't pick a weird color. Yeah. And then drop it off when you're done. So that's when I started realizing, like, all I have to do is ask for the sale. Yeah. Right? Show the good stuff, present the value, ask for the sale, and then shut up. Yeah. Right? Because the amount of people that talk their way right out of a sale that they almost landed, yeah, you just have to be like, burp. And like, you know, I have that kind of bitch face, like you know, you have as well.
We share it.
Yeah,
it's a common theme,
right? But you get me in my element at the front counter, as I like to say, and I can get pretty chatty, you know. So, but that's where, really, he just reacted to me. So we've got someone filming in the background here. So, but yeah, so that's where it started, and what ended up happening as I left to chase my dreams for a little bit. And when I came back to that same shop, the shop that I ultimately ended up buying, I looked through, and we'll probably talk about this in a little bit, but I looked through like the 3 years worth of invoices I had been gone, and realized like the most expensive pair of speakers they sold was $300. Wow. Which was low dollars for me. Sure. And I'm looking, and I just generate my own report from sales reports. And I get in contact with the owner. I'm like, hey, I want to put a set of $2,200 speakers on display.
Yeah.
And I want everything. I'm going to move everything out of one of your sound rooms, and it's just going to be those with the bits and pieces, and all of it's going to be high end, and it's going to be a super neat experience. But I need to spend like $6,000 or $7,000 of your dollars this week. And at first he's like,
it was hurting
I don't know about that. I'm like, your home theater room has speakers that are $7,000 a piece across the front. And you got 3 of them.
Yeah.
He's like, all right, let's see what you can do with it, right? And it was working, right? And not everyone was buying $2,200 speakers. I get it, but it was driving up, right? Like if you don't have a level X to offer, no one's buying level 3.
Sure. So
right?
if you put $2,200 speakers on display, then selling the $700 pair is going to be a piece of cake.
Yeah, or 1,000 in my case, right?
Correct.
So I instantly over tripled what our average speaker sale was, right? So, and then as we were coming towards the financial collapse, right, I was reading a home theater magazine, and I'm reading about this guy that says the theater in the box and the TV on the stand is dead, and he was only going high end. So I'm like, okay, like I've already seen this work for me.
Yeah.
So at that point, I literally, if someone came in, it was right, not all the way up to the top, right? Because I don't truly believe in top-down selling, because some of the top can like literally scare people away.
Sure can.
I had it happen to me in a jewelry store one time. I was shopping for a diamond. I'm like, look, I can only spend this. Guy shows me something that was like almost my year's salary. And like, of course I didn't do business with him because everything else looked terrible from there. So you have to really know, you have to be able to read your people. So it was that. It was being in the right area, right? I was a couple towns over from Princeton. That was our major clientele. We pulled all the way from the 5 boroughs, right? The town I grew up in was like, I knew how to speak to all those people because it was like, that's where I grew up.
Yeah.
So I'm uniquely fortunate because I didn't have a lot of those barriers, right? But what I have found out is it doesn't matter what building I'm standing in, right? Because if you have those skills and you know what to ask, or you're willing to take the time to ask the questions, none of it's luck.
Yeah.
So we can jump ahead to probably what your next question might be.
So I'm going to talk about me for a second.
Yeah.
I have the unique ability to act as almost a chameleon or a hybrid. Regardless of what room I go into, I can hold a conversation. So if you want to stick me in a boardroom with some high-level people, cool. I'll hang with them and have the conversation. You want to stick me in the bay and have conversations with the techs and the installers, I'll run with them all day too.
Sure.
And a lot of that has to do with my upbringing. And I'm very fortunate for this. I was raised by my mom. My mother was a single mother, and she ran into some hardships and whatnot. I was like, well, shit, I can't do this alone.
Right.
My father was gone, off drinking on a bar stool somewhere, right? So she couldn't rely on him. So my mom had a close friend of hers who was in a situation where she kind of needed a place to stay. And long story short, these two women come together. They wind up buying the house that they live in still to this day. And this woman, even though she's not blood, I just call her Aunt Donna at this point.
Right.
She may as well be my second mother.
Might as well.
Aunt Donna had a very, very high-level, high-profile job in corporate America for many years. And this was my integration. It's how I got indoctrinated and got to experience a lot of really cool shit that most people are like, come on, you probably didn't do that. Like, no, I did.
Yeah.
And I don't talk about it much because when I do, people are like, oh, he's just being a cocky asshole. Like, no, that's not the case whatsoever.
Right.
So she started in advertising. She worked on the agency side of things for many, many years. Switched over to the opposite side of the team and started working for big companies. She worked for Sony. And it was a really cool time when she worked for Sony. I was about 17 years old. And she used to bring home this big-ass catalog, and anything that Sony made was pennies on the dollar, including their car audio line at the time, and including Mobile ES back in the day when it was good shit.
Yeah, when people would drive to go get that.
Yeah. So she worked for Sony. From Sony, she went and worked for Pfizer for a number of years. And in her last position, she was the global media director for Avon.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So, again, I'm not saying that from a cocky perspective. I'm saying that because that stuff trickled down to me as a youth, a young adult, and even into my early 20s.
Yeah.
The opportunities awarded to her were, hey, I've got an opportunity to go on this trip. I have a +1. I'm not married.
Right.
You want to come with me?
Yeah.
Right. So I've been to 5 Super Bowls with her.
That's amazing.
Which is really cool. The first one I went, I believe I was in 7th or 8th grade, right? And then the last one, I'll never forget it. Bring back into the car space. I was in my early 20s, and I was building my own personal car for Metra that was going to go on display in their booth at Spring Break Nationals. I don't know how many years ago at this point.
Right.
And I remember going on this trip with her. It was to Florida, and we were at the new stadium where the Buccaneers play. It's not new anymore. It was new then.
Right.
And I remember going on that trip, and I had a deadline to get this vehicle done by. And I remember being there for the entire 4 or 5 days we're in Florida, just thinking the whole time, like, fuck, I need to get home. I need to get home because I got shit to do, you know, and I had this thought process in the back of my mind. But anyway, I give you all that information because the experiences I had there on those trips with her, I was around high-level, powerful people all the time.
100%.
And it gave me the experience to learn how to interact and deal with these kind of people and have conversations with them.
Right. Yeah. I had, again, being near finance, right? I had one of the major, most powerful wealth management companies, right? I had a bunch of clients that came from there. Pretty, you know, I was local, right? And we had the good reputation. And the Porsche dealer said that's where you go. So what I found out one time by accident is I was mentioning to somebody, I was like, oh, you work here? Well, you know, I know Will. And they're like, wait a minute. What do you mean you know Will? I said, oh, he was in here with his new car. You mean like his secretary was in here with the new car? I was like, no, he was here. And like, no. I'm like, yes. What am I missing here? They're like, don't you ever watch CNBC? I was like, do I look like I watch CNBC? I don't shave to go to work and I wear a hoodie. No, I don't watch CNBC. They're like, okay. So obviously you deal with us all the time, right? For those of us that are doing pretty well, our territory is like a whole state. If you're like Billy Badass, you might have a state and a half. I'm like, okay, great, good. He has an entire continent plus the lower half of our continent, plus an office in Europe and an office in the Middle East.
Oh, shit.
Exactly, right? And I was like, oh. I'm like, man, he's like so down to earth.
Yeah.
And they're like there's people in the office that have never spoken to him, you know?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, it sounds like he's busy. So then I find this out, and next time I talk to him, I'm like, I hear you're a big deal.
Yeah.
Right? And he's like, I'm a little busy. I'm like, did they ever let you on the company jet? He's like, no. Like, are you kidding me? Right? I was like, I don't even know how much money you manage, but like they're having you like fly coach. He's like, they don't fly me coach anywhere. But like it just became like this joke, right? Yeah. So, and when I left my business and I took an 8-month like sort of hiatus trying to figure out what I wanted to do, one day my phone rings and it's him. And he's like, hey, are you somewhere where you can build me a truck?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, I can build you a truck. What do you want? And he sends me an eBay listing of a Starwood Motors like F-150.
Yeah.
And it's like $100,000. And I'm like, I can do this. It's no problem. And he's like, cool. I'm like, how much do I have to spend? And he's like, what you see that thing there for? I'm like, all right. You sure you want an F-150? You don't want like F-250, F-350? He's like, I defer to you. And again, I said, if it doesn't change how many times you go to Starbucks, go get a diesel.
Yeah.
It'll be worth more when you're done, right? We ended up, that became like my halo build, like this really, really, really cool truck. The funny thing is he didn't even know where I was building it.
He didn't care.
He didn't care, but he calls me one day. He's like, hey, I landed early. I'm going to stop by the truck. Where is it?
Yeah.
Right? Because I had it for about a month. And he's like, this is where I'm heading. I'm like, you are literally heading in the wrong direction. I'm nowhere near there. I'm like, I'm a lot closer to home. So, I mean, to this day, I will just message him from time to time, or I'll just ask him, like, I'll ask him questions.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, hey, you know, is, you know, I've even asked him, like, finance stuff. Like, I even know what the hell I'm talking about. He's like, No, I'm not buying a new car yet. But again, it's like one of those things, like the exposure to these people and being totally comfortable, right? Imagine like everything that you've experienced with going to Super Bowls and going to these high level events.
Right.
I remember this one time when I had gotten out of car audio, I was in like just wheels and repair, tires and repair, I should say.
Yeah.
And we went to Russo's on the Bay for,
I've been to a wedding there.
Dude, crazy. We were there for Monroe Muffler, which is a much bigger company than anyone could even wrap their head around.
Yep.
And it was like an anniversary thing there. It was like a black tie event,
yeah.
And you're hanging out with some like super movers and shakers, and all you're trying to do when you're at the level that I was working is not put your foot in your mouth, right? Or come across like you're just like a dum-dum, But then once you get comfortable and you see you see someone else like have a little oops, well then you can loosen up, right?
Yeah.
Just like that thing. It's like, did you ever call Michael Mike?
Oh no.
No.
Yeah.
Because you probably got comfortable enough where you're like, okay. Because if you had like kept squeezing that, don't call him Mike, don't call him Mike, don't call him Mike, you would have ended up, just like boop, So yeah. One thing that you might not know is I got to the point where doing this and selling all the high-end product and all that sort of stuff and being really enthusiastic about a brand, I was asked by a brand to go represent them.
Okay.
And that's when I started doing speaking. So I had a manufacturer that's like, hey, there's an event in Canada. We can't get anybody on the U.S. team or from overseas there.
Right.
They're like, you've literally sold everything in the line.
Yeah.
You represent it well. Can you go? And I'm like, how am I getting there? And they're like, well, we'll fly you. We'll put you up in a hotel, and we'll figure it out on the back end. And I'm like, yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, cool.
So I went and did it, and that was the first time I ever spoke. And I had to do 2 classes, and they had given me like the bones, but then I wrote it in my voice.
Yeah.
And then from there, they had me train Crutchfield. So if you've ever heard of, people listening, if you've ever heard of a Crutchfield catalog or flipped through it, like I did 11 trainings in 2 days, trained everybody but the founder.
Yeah. Bill Crutchfield.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. And then when I thought, all right, this is pretty cool, I want to do more of this, they sent me back to Canada. Then I worked the Consumer Electronics Show, and then they sent me to Russia.
Yeah.
Right. So talking about, like, here I am, this car audio guy, that if you go back a little bit further, my father and my mother said, well, that's not a career, it's a fad.
Yeah.
Right. And like, here I am now.
Still doing it.
Yeah, still doing it, getting flown to go talk about it. Right. Yeah. This past Dallas, I crossed my 40th presentation doing public speaking.
Congratulations.
So at that point, thank you. I was like, I'm putting public speaking on my LinkedIn.
You better.
I think I've done it enough. I've been paid to do it. I've done it so boom, it's on there now.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You are a professional if you've been paid to do it. It's that simple.
Right. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
And if I go back after doing that first one, they're like, what do you want to get paid?
Yeah.
I was like, oh, shoot, I have no idea what to ask. And they're like, well, it's kind of easier. Like, we can obviously pay you, but it's easier to give you product.
Yeah.
Right. I was like, okay. So I asked for the highest model number in their car audio catalog. They gave me a set of $5,500 separates for speaking for 2 hours.
Yeah.
I was like, okay.
I'll take it.
Yeah, I'll take that. Yeah.
So here's a question. Did you put them in your own vehicle or did you sell them?
I sold them. Yeah. Like 2 years later, I ended up selling them. I was conflicted. I ended up selling them to an authorized dealer who was like the #1 guy, brick and mortar, to sell those. Yeah. And I gave them to him for less than what his cost would have been so that it presented a value to him.
Sure.
But yeah, I was super conflicted because I had friends that are like, oh, dude, I'll buy those for you, from you. And I was like, if I can't put them out correctly and I can't warranty them, it just puts me in an awkward spot,
Yeah.
And I've owned like some of the best stuff that no one's ever heard, because like I'll buy a bunch of stuff and before you know it, that car's gone and now nothing fits. So, so I sat on them for a few years. I'm like, I'm going to use them. I'm going to use them. Everyone around me is like, you're not going to use them.
Yeah.
So I ended up meeting up with Buddy and I was like, hey, here you go. This way, he had enough purchase history that he could warranty them if need be.
Yeah,
so,
that's cool. All right, so you took your hiatus. You get back into the industry a little bit. You've somewhat always been in and around the car world, though, wheels and tires and stuff. Yep. And we've talked about that here. Not here, but you and I have talked about that a bunch. And then your opportunity comes, it arises there's some life-altering events and massive changes in your life. And I'm a big believer in life-altering events. You and I have had lots of conversation around that. But you wind up moving to Nashville.
Yeah.
And you accept a job at Titan. So how long have you been there now? And tell me about like what it was like when you first got there and what it's turned into now.
Yeah. So after my hiatus, I opened up a shop for a buddy.
Yeah.
Right. He's like, hey, it's in your backyard. I don't know what you're doing. And we got that up and running. And, you know, but it was still like the grind of the Northeast. And I take everything so personally. So here I am. For the first couple of years, we were a two-man show.
Right.
We're doing $700,000, two guys. So we're working around the clock, working Saturdays, and going in on Sundays.
When you say two-man show, you're talking sales and install.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was in the Bay doing lift kits. I was doing installs. So was he. He was up at the counter.
Yeah.
Like here I am. I'm a guy who's running a store, also mounting and balancing.
Hold on a second. I got to interrupt.
Yeah.
Right. Because I was that guy too, who had the ability to sit at the front counter, but also go in the back and put the shit in.
Yep.
And I think there's a positive to it from a sales perspective. There's also a negative to it.
100%.
Yeah.
You can't get steamrolled when you can do it.
Yes.
So you can't, like the back of house can't run you over because you'll go back there and show them how to do it. And sometimes because you're looking at it through fresher eyes and you're watching a bunch of guys do it, you can collect the efficiencies and then be like, boom, come in as like a rock star. So, but it was sort of like we were trying to grow this thing from nothing to something, you know, and we were getting to the point where we were bringing people on. But in any case, so you have that happen. My wife's been self-employed her entire life, right? So she's working anywhere up to 7 days a week, right? We have our daughter. We have she has a skin cancer scare, which results in 2 surgeries.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I need to be at the surgery, but I also have the stress of like this shop that I am the captain of.
Yeah.
I'm not there, right? And because I'm not there and everything's in my head, it sort of comes to like a screeching halt. So, okay, like I'm learning here that there needs to be the ability for things to run when I'm not around. It's my own fault.
Right.
And then you have, you know, a whole bunch of stuff that happens. You know, it's happening all over, but it happens really hard in the Northeast. There's some civil unrest that's going on, and it's just like, I'm done with this.
Yeah.
Right. And
so what year is this now?
So I'm terrible with years. So it's got to be 19 or 20.
Okay.
Right. So right in the middle of like COVID and all.
Sure. So then we're 20.
Yeah. So like COVID, riots, all that stuff. Right. On an off thing, my wife is like, we should fly down to Chattanooga to go to a concert. So we flew down, literally flew down, saw a concert, flew back. And while we were down there, she's like, I kind of like Tennessee, right? So fast forward to like all this stuff, and like, you know, my hair's thinning. I don't sleep worth anything.
This is all stress-related shit from the shop.
Oh, yeah. Because I, whether it's my business or not, if I'm in there, I'm carrying the stress because I'm there to serve the client, right? So she's like, you have to change. She's like, I didn't marry you for you to die on me. You know, like effectively those words. She's like, so what would you do?
Yeah.
And at the time, there weren't a whole lot of shops I thought that I could jump into and make that could either handle what I do to them, right? As far as like all of a sudden you've got these big projects, or, you know, it's just like, I'd go work at Titan, right? And so in that industry, they are the Titan, right? They're the biggest ones. As far as I can tell, the only sort of people in that space that do larger numbers, maybe West Coast Customs, maybe, right? You take away apparel, and it might not even be the case, right? So, and there's like the biggest hotshots in that space working there. And I had sort of lofted it past them, and at a knowledge fest, like, hey, like, when are you guys going to hire me? Like, literally, I'm the only guy that you should be looking at. Well, I get a phone call, I get a text message.
Yeah.
And it's, would you seriously consider moving down here? And I'm like, yeah, I'm ready to go. My phone rings. It's the store manager.
Yeah.
And he's like, are you serious right now? I'm like, yeah. He's like, why would you leave that? I was like, why wouldn't I leave it? And I'm like, I'm literally just running the store for somebody else, you know? And like, I heard you guys are 5 days a week and you got a big team, so I don't have to be everything to everyone. He's like, that's exactly the case. I hang up with him. My phone rings again. It's the owner.
Yeah.
Right. And he's like, when can you come down? I'll fly you down. I said, too late. I already booked a flight. Right. So my whole thing was, I didn't want to owe anybody.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to feel any sort of way. If you're going to fly me down and you're going to do this and do that, you know, if I fly down, it's on, and I don't like it, it's on me.
Yes.
You didn't waste any of your money to see whether, and what I wanted to do, because there were so many big personalities in one building, I wanted to go see that, because I'd seen them out at events.
Yeah, you want to go see that dynamic and feel the energy of that space at one time.
And not to mention, I wanted to see like what that area was like, right? So I go down and kind of clicking with everybody. And the thing is, I already knew people from the industry, right? And Phil, the owner, he's like, hey, here's the deal. I need you here in 3 weeks. I was like, okay. And he's like, you know, he's got some stuff going on and all good stuff, you know?
Yeah.
And he's like, I need you here for 3 weeks. I'm like, okay, I can be here for three weeks, in 3 weeks, but after 3 weeks, I got to go home for a week. And he's like, done. And that was it, right? So I went back, I put in my notice, and then we started looking at, okay, like, how's this going to work? We had no idea. So I literally packed up enough stuff, drove down, and went to work. And my family stayed up north, which was terrible.
Yeah,
you want to talk about, you think you're going to know how to handle something, but like we're kind of, it's the three of us kind of always, you know, partially because since we had so little downtime, we would just be together in that little bit of downtime, whatever we had. So I remember going to pull away, rolling my window up because like tears are starting to roll down my face, and I'm like pretty stone-faced guy, you know, and I was like, man, like this was rough. Like throat's getting a little dry. I had to stop at a gas station, get something to drink. That was, so I show up. The day I show up in Tennessee, the owner is gone now for 3 weeks.
So you haven't even seen him?
No, and I'm staying in his house. P.S. by the way, right? I'm staying in his house. He's not there, right? And I'm in a totally different market, and I don't know how they do things. I don't know the distributors. You know, I know that I can put together estimates and get things going. So I was actually selling jobs and leaning on old relationships to get products going. And I'm like, hey, I'll just cut you a check, like whenever I see the parts. And because I have like 20-something year relationship, the parts were just flowing, right? And then I was 3 weeks in. I had all my stuff packed up in my truck, ready to go home. Yeah, because I didn't think they were impressed with what I was doing, right? So I told one of the techs, I'm like, hey, I'm going to give my notice at the end of the day, and then I'll probably be heading out of here, you know? He's like, no. He's like, I'm sorry, but I'm going to go make this shitstorm right now. Yeah. So then I'm getting pulled into offices. I'm like, look, like I don't feel like I'm delivering here. They're like, you literally have had no training to what we do, and you're keeping up. Like and keep in mind, this is a thing where, like, you take a car audio guy or you take a wheel and tire guy and you drop them into those ecosystems and they'll do okay. There aren't a whole lot of people that can go from the front of the bumper back to the bumper, right? Yes. Trucks, cars, SUVs, boats, side by side, whatever it is, without it having to run through multiple people. Right. Even internally at that point, they would have to team up, right? And they're like, no, you're doing great. So I was like, okay, I'll stay for a little bit longer.
Let's pause here for a second, because a lot of people who are listening to this aren't familiar with the automotive space.
Yeah.
And what you're trying to say here is that it's not common for someone to have the ability to speak at a very high level and know things about all parts of the vehicle.
Correct.
Or multiple kinds of vehicles, like you said, side-by-sides versus jet skis, motorcycles. Yeah. Right. And you come to the space with that ability. And one of the reasons why, and you touched on it before, was the simple fact that you're the nerd. Yeah. And I say that with love, by the way, because I consider myself a nerd too. Yeah. Right. You were the nerd who was reading all of the boating magazines, the car audio magazines, the hot rod, the wheel and tire, all that stuff back in the day, and that gave you the information that is now serving you later in life that's allowing you to better serve your clients as well?
I was spending over $120 a month in magazines. I'm not kidding. Like, I was a nut with it. And I was just talking about this to some of our young sales guys.
Yeah.
I'm like, I read 4x4, I read Car and Driver, Hot Rod. The ones that helped me the most, Rob Report and DuPont Registry.
I believe it.
Right?
High-end clientele.
High-end clientele. And so there's this, and we might get to it, there's this thing that I've been working on is like you have to know when to normalize, know when to sensationalize, and know when to make it trivial, right? Because that's where you get people to be like, oh, I get it, right? They want something special, sensationalize it, right? There's a whole ton of people out there that feel bad because they're doing really well for themselves, and when they go to spend, so you have to normalize it a little bit, right? And then you have the cocky guy that drops his black Amex. You just trivialize it and be like, oh, it's no big deal, right? Or is it a big deal? He's like, no, you're goddamn right, it's not a big deal. Here's my credit card, you know? So, yeah. So if I can talk numbers for a second, I was just actually running my numbers. I've been at Titan, like I said, a little over 3 years. I've pulled my gross sales numbers. As of Friday, I was at $5.95 million.
Right. So you're at $6 million in just over 3 years.
In just over 3 years. And for perspective, the average shop in our space does about $424,000 a year, has an average invoice of less than $200 per ticket. My average invoice hovers around like $4,900. You know, so, and I'm super happy because the other sales guys I work with, that neither of them are like longtime career guys. They're both going to break $1 million this year.
That's awesome.
And one of which, this is only his second year selling.
That's big right there.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
So
here's a question.
Yeah.
What's the biggest ticket you've sold while at Titan?
160,000.
Okay.
Yeah, 160,000.
Custom build?
It was a truck build. Okay. Yeah, it was a truck build. I've got 2 clients that in less than 2 years have spent over 300 grand. Like, I have clients that spend more than any of our car dealerships, right? So it's funny because I joke around. I'm a firm believer in 80% of your business comes from 20% of your clients.
Absolutely.
My top 3 clients actually are within $70,000 of the next 7, right? But then if you were to go further down that line, like, you know, I'm fortunate. I have a bunch of really enthusiastic clients, some of which their you know, families told them to go get a hobby. Others of which they're just super enthusiastic about it and just like cool things. But yeah, 160 on one vehicle. Yeah. With a lifetime value so far over 300 grand.
That's awesome. Yeah. What's the turnaround time on a project of that scale? And granted, you guys have a big facility and a lot of very talented, capable guys to kick out that kind of work. But what's the turnaround time? So, okay, cool. Dude comes in, you have the conversation. This is not a typical sales conversation at 160 grand, by the way, I would assume.
It was pretty typical.
Oh, fuck.
So I'll tell you, his first ticket with me was about $60,000. Okay. Right. And it was about a 10 to 15 minute conversation. My biggest fear in this is that someone will be underserved, where like someone who wants to come in and treat themselves or do something really radical to a vehicle, that they only end up spending, say, $4,000 or $5,000 when realistically it's not what they want. Yeah. They want the moon, right? So when we had this conversation about this truck, it was a typical conversation, and like you like to say, I don't want to sound cocky. I don't care if I sound cocky or not. That was one of the easiest transactions.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Really doesn't. You see memes going around the internet these days. It's like
the 500 and the 50,000.
The $500 customer is the one who's the biggest pain in the ass. Yeah. The guy who drops 50 grand is like, hey, here's the money. Oh, by the way, I'm going to wire it to you, and just give me a call when the project's done. Yeah.
Yeah. So to circle back around, this was, if we take out product availability, right, all the products there, from when he dropped the truck off to when he got it back, it was 2 months. Okay. Yeah. And we had outsourced part of that job just because we didn't want to bog down the shop. So the truck was out of our hands for almost 4 weeks. Okay. So, and it was reimagining the suspension, reimagining the exterior, full complete audio, lighting, everything. Like there was just an event in Tennessee, there was probably 800 trucks, and it was one of the top 20.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is when I look at it, it's not the flash. It's big. Don't get me wrong. It's a big truck, but it's not crazy flashy. But it was all the cohesiveness and all the detail, right, that got it. Do you remember Hot Import Nights and like all those shows?
Yes, I do. I had a couple of vehicles at Hot Import Nights.
Right. So go back to Hot Import Nights. I got a best engineered at a Hot Import Nights with a domestic vehicle.
Oh, wow.
So that's like sort of the level, right? Because I was like, okay, is it a off the shelf part or is it like a really cool part? And if it's a really cool part, did you customize it? Yeah. And if you customize it, did you customize it the difficult way? Like the Rube Goldberg way of doing anything is complicated as far as possible. And that's kind of how that worked. So yeah. My second behind that, probably like right around 140.
Yeah.
So again, pretty straightforward stuff. I think if you don't get rocked back on your heels, those conversations can be super easy.
Yeah.
You know, selling that to somebody that is like lawsuit money.
Yeah.
That's a different story. You know, sometimes.
Sure.
So yeah.
I love it. All right, let's fast forward here. You got your thing going on with Titan. You and I had a conversation. We bumped into each other in Indianapolis this year. Spent some time together, went to dinner, and had good conversations. We always do.
Yep.
And something sparked inside of me after that interaction with you. And I reached out to you a couple days later. I was like, hey, man, like grab a spot on my calendar.
Yep.
And I want to give you an hour of my time, and I want to talk some stuff with you. And we did. We hopped on a Zoom. We had a conversation. And I flat out asked him, like, man, what are you trying to do here? Because the way that I view it is like, all right, cool. Here's Dan. He's this accomplished dude. He's really fucking good at what he does. He's well known in the industry. He's well respected. His clients love him. People in the industry love him. But there's more for him that he hasn't tapped into yet. And some of the stuff that was uncovered in that conversation, I was like, oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
I know how to do this. Let me give you some game here. And a couple things we talked about was, books, public speaking, building the personal brand, establishing yourself further as the authority within the space, within the industry, right? And now this is the path that we're going down. One of the reasons you're sitting here in this room today is because this is part of that master plan that we talked about.
Get on podcasts. Here we are.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, what's the grand plan you have here? What are you trying to accomplish? And what are the steps you're taking towards making that a reality?
Yeah, so we were walking back from dinner, and I remember exactly. I was like, I really like the public speaking. I'd like to do more of that, and I want to get out in front of more people. But in order to do that, like it has to support itself, essentially, Yeah. And when I jumped on the calendar with you, and you had your Google sheet, which I just opened the other day, because every time I check something off that list, it whether you can see it or not. Right, I'm like, well, it's his Google Doc. You can probably see every time I open it, right? And it's like I just started going in and drilling down, right? So the big sales and all that, they're cool, they're fun, they pay, right? But getting in front of people and helping them grow their business, right? Giving them a nudge in the correct direction, that to me is far more fulfilling than, hey, like what's your biggest, and don't get me wrong, I like having the biggest tickets.
Sure.
But one of the things that we did after you and I spoke, and we kind of, we bumped into each other after we did that Google meeting, right? So I started writing a book. You're like, hey, you got to write a book, right? So I started writing a book, and then all of a sudden it kind of took a fork to what might be a second book. So when I start writing it down, it's whatever direction it's going. That's what's getting written down that day.
Yeah.
The funny thing is for years I have been playing with the idea of a podcast called "What's He Do," right? And just something to get out in front of people. Clients might find it interesting. Yeah. Number one question I get when I give people a tour, whatever facility I'm working in, and they come across like one of those big halo builds, they're like, "What's he do?"
Yeah.
Right. And like, only a small handful of my clients are celebrities or athletes, right? They're people, with really interesting stories. Like, how did you get there? And I always figured that was going to be my path to whatever the next segment was doing something like that just to get myself out there. Well, as it turns out, doing what you're talking about and more solidifying this being in the space as someone who's got information to say and it's actually worth something will actually help me if I decide to go down the road and do that podcast later, because there'll be more exposure. So what started driving all this is the MEA, the Mobile Electronics Association. For 2023, I was voted the Sales Pro, so the top sales award. And I had gotten there sort of just through work, putting in the work, and never really did any sort of like higher education or anything like that. So I really started like reading, going through audiobooks and everything like that. I'm like, oh, that's what that's called. I've been doing all these things, not knowing that they were actually a thing, right? Like the 80-20 rule and like I was joking around about like Dunbar's numbers and all that sort of stuff. Like I've been doing all that stuff. I just had no clue. So aggregate the information, put out usable information, get published, use that to get out on the bigger stages with the idea that I can show people like, hey, I'm here. I walk the walk. Let me help you grow your business. Yeah. Right. And as a little thing, I've gotten involved on some industry sales pro closed chats. And I put this thing out there like, hey, like I've got a different way of coming up with my estimates and how I deal with people. And I know a lot of people they don't always write these big monster things and you might be afraid of it. So write an estimate to me. My name, this is what I drive. While I was here, I never once looked at my watch, right? I told you as long as it looks factory by the time I'm done, I'd be interested in hearing about some custom. I want all the locations upgraded and all that sort of stuff. So basically gave them a snapshot of who could be standing in front of them. Right. And so it's a 12-volt industry. Their call to action isn't fantastic, right? Had 2 people take me up on it. The one guy who took me up on it, I was like, okay, cool. I see it. Can I send you mine back? Right. And I sent it to him. And he's like, oh, I see. Right. Because it's like, there's the things, nobody needs anything I do. Right. So the things that don't change, right. The building blocks for whatever the upgrades you want, and then give the path for them to self-upgrade or add on. Right. There's upselling and there's attachment sales. So if you can break out the attachment sales and present value, oftentimes people will be like, oh, I didn't even think of that. Let's include that. So I sent that back. He's like, okay. He's like, we were almost like dead on the labor. He's like, I see where you did the changes. He's like, that's super interesting. I was like, if you think that's interesting, can we get on a call? Yeah. Right? And I had no idea what I was going to do. So he's like, yeah. It took us like a couple weeks. We ended up doing a Zoom call, and I have like the free Zoom. So I burned all the way through and had to start another one, right? And I came out of that room like lightning, right? And I was like, I need to do this. I need to, because, and the best part is the very next day, he sends me a picture. He's like, I implemented one of the things you said. He's like, and the guy didn't even flinch. He's like, I'm going to be doing this far more often. I'm like, boom. Yes.
You just made that guy thousands of dollars more this year.
Yeah. Yo, for sure. And beyond that, he knows to ask more of the questions, and who knows how much it'll unlock, right? He's in a pretty affluent area. He's got good pull, and that's like some of the stuff that people need to realize, because people are like, oh, I'm in not a great area. Most shops aren't in a great area, right? The shop that I was in, I love the shop that I was at before I moved down to Tennessee. I was in Morrisville, Pennsylvania. The reason why you haven't heard of it is because you haven't heard of it, right? It's a depressed town, right? It's not affluent at all. It's right across the river from Trenton, which, if you know Trenton's particularly murdery, it's not a fantastic area, but totally surrounded by affluence. So if your reputation's good enough, people will come, right? And if they take the time to get there, serve them properly, and then just watch the magic happen from there.
That's pretty wild. It's a very similar path that I've been down, right? And we've talked about this before. It's like I didn't set out to get into the coaching and consulting.
Right.
But that was never my initial intent. My initial intent when I got into the self-development, let's go better the business, let's go better me game, was to build the business better. So
Right.
I can create more with the business, do more, have more impact, spend more time with the family rather than just working 24/7. And going down that path, I started doing good, and people started reaching out to me saying, hey, I got a question for you. Hey, what would you do with this? Hey, what would you do in this situation?
Yeah.
Hey, put eyeballs in this for a minute, if you wouldn't mind. Hey, I'm in this situation over here, and so says this, but I don't really think that's going to happen. You know, this is what I want to do. What do you think? And I had a buddy of mine who witnessed me doing it one day, and this is a real high-level guy who's got more businesses and LLCs than he could probably count, and has 2 of his own jets, flies around on them, and he looks at me. We were in a meeting one day. He looks at me and he goes, "What the fuck are you doing?" And I was like, "Helping people." He goes, "Yeah, for fucking free."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, "What's up, man?" He goes, "You got to cut that shit out."
Yeah.
He goes, "You are way too experienced, and you're giving way too much of your information out for free." And he kind of made me promise him that day that I would never use the word free in that sense. Like when someone calls you and says, "Hey, man, are you free?
Right.
Got a minute?" The answer is always no.
Yeah.
I'm not free. However, I am available.
Right.
Oh, okay, cool. So little language changes here in the way that you talk about yourself.
Yeah, the incremental changes.
Right. Self-worth then changes with it too. So start using these little changes, and all of a sudden, oh, okay, cool. Then he pulls out his phone and shows me his Calendly links. Right. And I'm like, I got a Calendly in myself. I ain't using it like this.
Yeah.
And he's got paid Calendly links. I'm like, what are these for? He goes, these are for the fucking tire kickers.
Right.
What do you mean? He goes, how many times do you have people who slide into your DM or shoot you a text or send you email like, hey, man, I need some insight, some help from you.
Yeah.
Right. And you know this person is just there to take.
Right.
Okay, cool. He goes, well, what do you do? It's like, I don't know. I usually get on the phone with them and help them.
Yeah.
He's like, you see, that's what I'm talking about. He goes, you could be making money from this. And he goes, matter of fact, you could be making 6+ figures a year just from this, along with your existing business you have now. All right, well, now I'm intrigued. Tell me more. He's like, put together a paid Calendly link. Calendly is going to integrate with Stripe or PayPal. So before they book the time with you, they have to pay the money.
Right.
Oh, okay, cool. And then if the person does pay, cool, get them on the phone, help them as best as possible, and then try to upsell them into something else with you and say, hey, the money, the $250, the $1,000 you paid me for this call, I'll roll that into one of my other packages. So now the lifetime value of the customer is going up too.
Yeah.
You're not wasting your time. You're only dealing with people who are serious. Right, man? I can't tell you how many times I still use this today where I had a guy a couple weeks ago, maybe last week. It's like, hey, you told me XYZ. This is like 2 years ago. I put a post out. I was like, hey, if you buy 250 copies of my book, I'll spend a day with you one-to-one in person. So the guy replies back to me. He's like, so I bought like 15 copies of your book and I gave them out. How much would it cost me to get an hour of your time? So I sent him my paid link.
Yeah.
And my paid link right now, it's $1,000 for an hour.
Right.
Okay. And that's not just a number I'm pulling out of my ass. Like I know the
Right. It's a market number. Yeah.
To put together to figure it out. So I send him this thing. And the beauty of Facebook Messenger is you can tell when someone reads your shit.
Yeah.
Fucking dude left me on red. You know what? That thing served its purpose.
Yeah.
It served its purpose if he would have paid the money, right? Because he would have gotten value from it. And it also served its purpose because it helped me protect my time.
Yeah. Well, weren't you just talking, well, I don't know, because I kind of went down a deep dive to see how your podcast went.
Yeah.
Right? With a chiropractor or something like that?
Yes.
Yeah, that story. I mean, how do you get, granted there's some initial dollar component, but the fulfillment of that, I mean, I can't even imagine.
Dude, it was so fucking cool.
Yeah.
I had that calendar link priced really high about 2 years ago, intentionally. It was priced at $2,500 for an hour. Okay. That link is in my bio and all my social media accounts.
Yeah.
So this dude's local here to DFW. Guys follow me on Instagram for quite some time. And I wake up one morning, pull up my phone, and there's an alert from Calendly or Stripe, and it says, such and such paid the invoice. What the fuck is this?
Right.
And it's $2,500.
Yeah.
So I'm taking a look, log into Stripe. Oh shit. Okay, cool. I see who it is. They booked a call, and there's notes in there. Hey, this is Dr. So-and-so. I'm a local chiropractor, been following you for quite some time, and I really need help, and you seem to be the one who can help me scale my business.
Yep. All
right, cool. So the date comes. I hop on the damn Zoom with the guy, right? spend 10 minutes or so, like, what are you trying to get out of this so I can provide the best value to you? And then literally drilled down and gave this guy information. So when I do a call like that with somebody, and this is before I even had this, but now I've got Fireflies, the AI note taker, right? So it gives me a transcription plus bullet points of the entire call.
Yeah.
I download that into a Word document. Boom, you get it. You also get a copy of the video because we're going to record the entire video.
Right.
He was also a very proactive gentleman. It's one of the reasons he's probably a doctor.
Right.
Right. He took really good notes.
Yeah.
And I checked up with him here and there a couple times, over the years, check in, yeah, things are going good. And then I wake up a couple weeks ago, and the guy's in my DMs, and he's showing me screenshots of his bank account.
Yeah.
And one of them was right before our call. I think he had like $3,000 in the bank account. And the second one, I think it was $180,000 or something just sitting in the account.
Right.
Right. And he's like, this is because of our conversations and some of the things you told me to go implement. He goes, I've implemented them now.
Yeah.
And look at the success that I've achieved from it. So that right there is the entire reason I do what I do.
Yeah. Well, you took the time to say, hey, jump on a call with me, and you had like a Google sheet, right? And you've met my wife, and after we got off the call and I was showing her, and she's like, man, this is awesome. Like, he took his time to do this, And the one thing that I've sort of always realized is, if someone who's a couple rungs up, all they want to do is see you start like kicking that wheel down the road, right? Because the amount of times that someone asks you a question and it falls on deaf ears, whether, it really sucks when they pay you. It sucks even worse when they haven't paid you and you've given them the tools and they don't apply them, right? We call those people assholes, right? So my thing was I want to be respectful of your time because you took time to put that together.
Right.
And I was like, well, I've got this punch list. I've got this roadmap that I'm going to just keep like doubling down on this list. And, we've seen each other socially, right? I haven't really brought up the list, have I? I've just like, yeah, because like that was that thing. And then, I'm going to belly up and buy some of your time up here pretty soon. But until then, until I have all this done, the next conversation is going to be like, yeah, go back to the list. Like, I don't want to pay you to tell me to go look at a list that you already gave me for free. I'm going to finish the list and be like, okay, where do I go from here? So, and like support where I can. So, so that's sort of where I'm at. I'm going through, I'm doing the work, right? Immediately went and bought domain names and all that sort of stuff. And just kind of punching away a little bit at a time. And it's, I kind of have some goals because our season of our trade shows starts back up in February, and I'd like to have something tangible to hold.
I hope to make it this February, by the way.
Do yourself a favor. Uber.
Yeah, no valeting with the truck.
Yeah, Uber to the airport, if you would. So that's the goal. And when I think about like what you did and sort of you just were talking about some of these numbers, and I know you have sort of you have a membership thing, 6 months, you have one-on-one, you go out to them and all that sort of stuff, and it's just like, there's an ask for every seat. So make sure you got every single seat because you just don't know when someone's going to call you up and be like, hey, I want you to come out to a multi-store and, for someone like me, come out to our multi-store setup and grind with the salespeople for like a whole week and like, what's your number? Or it's just like, we have a number in mind, and that's where like, and they drop a number way bigger than you thought. And so you just shut up and you're like, well, I mean, I could probably make it work for that. Yeah. I'm also going to need rental, So, and that's sort of what I'm working at because like, I think to myself how many times I was like, when I had business partners, I'm like, we probably need to talk to somebody that's doing something, and they didn't want to bring in coaching. They didn't want to bring in employees, and it's just like we're stuck here. Yeah. Like we're super safe, but we're stuck. So so that's what I'm working towards because what I see, the core of this is there's a bunch of people that are in business that were hobbyists, and now they're in business, right? Or they've got a building they go to every day, right? And they work around the clock. And I know people that have been in business for near 10 years and never drawn a paycheck, right? Living off of their spouse's salary. They're never home, all that sort of stuff. My big perspective shift was I was actually, when I was in Russia, I was traveling with a manufacturer who's from Germany. And in Germany, they have a lot of time off, and they really value their time off, you know? And we were sort of like trading war stories, and he goes, I have to stop you. He's like, I'm literally getting sick to my stomach thinking about what you're doing to you and your family. He's like, you need to stop. And that was like, that exact face, right?
Yeah.
Where hidden, but internally, like that was the face. It was more like, no, I'm made of stone, dude. I'll just keep doing this. You know, emotions, lock them down. You're sick, you go to work sick. You know, so it only takes like where you're stuck in your office with the lights off with a migraine thrown up in the sink and they're still asking you questions through the door. You're like, something's got to change. Yeah. Something's got to change. So, yeah. And now it's just like, okay, I'm working probably the least I've worked consistently. I leave on time, and I can get people there, right? Just by making them more effective at the sales counter.
Yes.
I don't want to come in and upend anybody's business, right? I'm not going to be the person that says, hey, look, you have to change your entire model. No. What I can do is show you how to maximize and properly serve your clients. It's all about serving the clients. Yeah. Don't underserve. Everyone is underserving, right? Explain, ask the questions, show them what can be done, and you will see your invoices grow. Yeah. Right? You'll see them grow. Just like I have to imagine in your space, right? People get an idea because like you're very much, from what I understand, process and procedure, right? But then on top of that, like you've got all this stuff that's, you know, backed by software, right? You're even like, you know, I know from conversation, you're looking at other softwares that can help people that are already, it's like, okay, cool. Here's the software. Here's your starter template. This is going to catapult you 5 years. You don't even know what this is going to do for you, right? And then on the back end, if you take fractional, you know, COO stuff, this makes it easier for me to see exactly what's going on instead of me flipping through handwritten receipts for 6 months, you know? So, and it's just like, you know, well, I don't know how deep the wound is, right, until I start talking to you or you to me. It's just like, if you were going to come in and try and optimize my old business, you would have had a lot to say, you know? So, yeah, you know, I don't think there's a whole lot of people that are sort of doing what I think I can offer, right? Because there's on the back of house, and getting things running smooth, right? I'm very much, I've always said, I'm very much, you want me forward facing, right? And I can help people be forward facing effectively, and you know, when I joined I opened that second shop for my buddy. I was like, what is the biggest invoice you've ever had? And he told me, I was like, I'm going to take a deposit bigger than your biggest job. And he's like, if you do, I'll give you $1,000 cash. Yeah. I went over and I racked his credit card machine for $25,000, and he's just sitting there dumbfounded, like reaches into his pocket and peels off $1,000 and just hands it to me. He goes, keep doing that, right? So
yes, sir.
Yeah, you know. And he's just like, I don't know how you're going to get it done. I was like, we'll figure that out. We'll figure it out. You know, like this is good. So yeah, so that's where I'm at. Keep plugging, do the work as you've outlined it. You know, and then once I get to a point where I've got everything checked off and it all makes sense, that's when I can come, you know, knock it on your calendar and be like, hey, what's my next thing?
Yeah, I'm going to launch this sucker.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
Dude, this has been awesome. We're an hour and 30 minutes in, which is like double the length of a typical podcast, but fuck it. We had a great conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You know, let me end with this before we ask you the age-old podcast question of where we can find you.
Yeah.
We talked about you coming on the podcast. You delayed for a little while. You said, hey, I want to get my ducks in a row. Cool, I respect that. Yeah. And then you reached out to me and you said, hey, have you ever done a podcast episode in person? Would you consider me, you know, coming in and recording with you? I was like, fuck yeah. It's like, they're way better in person than over Zoom or StreamYard or whatever software you're going to use. And, you know, my time at BFA, I spent almost 2 years recording every episode in person.
Right.
And I've only done a handful in person since then. So Thank you for offering. Thank you for getting your ass out of Tennessee and flying down to Dallas here early in the morning. This is a one-day, so turn and burn for you. So
fly back tonight. Yeah.
So thank you for offering and coming down and actually showing up and doing it like a professional.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you having me. Like I said, this is the first podcast, and as per your suggestion, people are going to be hearing my voice all over the place. Good.
They need to.
Yeah.
Where can we find you?
So right now it's under construction, but therealdanbowman.com is live. You can get a hold of me there. You can find me on social media all over the place. If you get on Facebook or Instagram and you type in Dan Bowman and some variation of car audio, I'm going to show up all over the place.
Yeah.
But the website is therealdanbowman.com.
Love it, dude. Appreciate you coming in today.
Thanks so much.
Yep.
Thank you for tuning in to the Step It Up Entrepreneur Podcast. Make sure you head over to stepitupentrepreneur.com and make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode of the Step It Up Entrepreneur Podcast.